I'm Kathryn Laing, and I teach in the Department of English Language and Literature at Mary Immaculate College in Limerick.
My name is Geraldine Brassil, and I hold a Government of Ireland Postdoctoral Fellowship 2024. I am also based at Mary Immaculate College, Limerick. And our overall title is Visibilities, Mapping the Publishing Trajectories of Mid to Late 19th Century Irish Women Writers.
I've been interested for a long time in the digital humanities and have attended in the past the digital humanities at Oxford Summer School some years ago, and have attended numerous seminars and workshops where scholars have demonstrated their outcomes of working with a range of digital tools, and especially visualizing software, which we're very interested in. But I've had little follow-up experience subsequent to those, or actual training. So aspirations, but never getting the opportunity to work more closely with these tools. And I've been very aware of the possibilities and outcomes of applying new digital methodologies to humanities research. For example, the project led by Professor Geraldine Meany's Victor study, which combines data analytics and literary criticism to investigate representations of migrants, for example. So there are these very large projects out there which are very inspiring and interesting. So background is awareness, but little sort of focused application so far until now. Over to Geraldine.
Mm-hmm. And similarly to Kathryn, I suppose my experience to date has been, attending workshops and seminars. And I suppose, to give some background, one of the methodologies for my PhD thesis, this is what actually brought me to digital humanities. My thesis was focused on recovering or reclaiming Irish women writers from 19th century periodicals, examining their diverse writing across a range of publications and exploring, how they pushed outwards to expand limiting expectations about the role and position of women. So I was trawling through these periodical archives, and I quickly became alert to the sheer magnitude of contributions by Irish women writers. And, the question then was the difficulty of marshalling all this evidence into navigable form. And so I solved this by constructing an Excel database. So that was kind of my first introduction. And that database that catalogued all identifiable Irish women writers across several periodicals and newspapers. And my dates were 1850 to 1900. So that was 50 years of material. So the collated cultural data, it maps these Irish women writers, and it often highlighting the interconnectivity that was between these women, the networks of women writers, that were actually there. So the data set, it's a relatively small sample case study, but it nevertheless indicates, the female presence in periodical publishing. And it offers opportunities for expansion, because I can insert other periodicals into this data set. But then my question was, what next? I have this data set. How could I future-proof it? How could I maximize its functionality? So this is what brought me to CLS and to the, to the digital humanities.
I wanted to jump in there just in addition to Geraldine's comments, that just to give a little bit of background to the network, which is very much connected with her project. But the establishing that network in 2016 with the aim to make the works and profiles of a rich diversity of Irish women writers, poets, journalists, novelists, etc., making them visible and accessible, first of all, via the network website, is sort of one of the inspirations for sort of furthering knowledge in digital humanities, especially as well. And the work that I've done and that Jerry and I are doing on recovering late 19th century Irish women's writing is, I think, really interesting and speaks to the digital humanities in various ways as well. And the particular data set that is developed, has been developed out of Geraldine's larger data set, is what we've been both working on what we describe as the Rosa Mulholland Project, who's one of the many writers who features in Geraldine's original data set. And that's what we've been focusing on in the during our fellowship as well. And the question of why Rosa Mulholland in particular, she was a prolific and still marginalized, but still marginalized Irish woman poet, essayist, and novelist, but highly published across a multitude of different periodicals and newspapers. And her visibility, like so many of her female literary contemporaries, has disappeared. She's been lost to readers um, in various ways, although she, amongst most of her contemporaries, has received more attention, a more scholarly attention, who've turned to gaps and silences around the narratives of 19th century literary histories. But what we've been doing then is adding to these processes of recovery. That was the sort of focus of our project in Trier. And what's become clear to us now is, of course, there is so much more of her work waiting to be brought to light across transnational archives. And we know that we're still just scratching the surface here and building on this. So a little bit more background there.
Well, I suppose it's a painstaking process. You know, it's actually trawling through the archives, various. I suppose I started out with women writers, and there was one writer in particular that I was interested in, and the whole process started because of the periodicals that she was writing, and she just wrote in a limited number. I think it was 5 to 7 periodicals. So those particular ones, I traced them through the archives, and then what became very apparent was that she was not the only woman who was writing in these periodicals. You know, there was many other women writing as well. So I started to draw in the other women writers, and one of these was Rosa Mulholland. And so I had this big Excel data sheet, and it was entering, you know, the author, and of course the difficulty in the 19th century periodical archive is that many of these women were anonymous. So, you know, I only recorded women, you know, if I could identify who they were. And again, this involved lots of trawling through archives and finding clues about who people were. And so then the Rose Mulholland data set came out of the larger one, and Kathryn and I have been adding to this, you know, data set. And, you know, it's been a methodological process for our Rose Mulholland project is to, you know, gather all the work that she has done. And it has ranged from Ireland to London to Melbourne over to Boston, you know. So we took this data set with us then. This is the one we took to Germany, and you know, the CLS INFRA fellowship at Trier Centre for Digital Humanities. It gave us the opportunity to work on this, you know, and to explore with digital tools, you know, how to create meaningful knowledge from all of this material. You know, and it's an ever increasing collection of cultural metadata. And also, you know, we looked at possibilities of, you know, how to make this visible and accessible for readers. So we see ourselves at the interface between literary studies and digital humanities. We're still very much beginners. You know, but what has happened is that the fellowship has given us confidence, you know, increased confidence, I suppose, understanding of digital methods, and increased confidence to go forward with our project. And on that note, I would like to extend our sincere thanks to Christoph and all the team at Trier for, you know, being so welcoming and supportive while we were there.
We learned a great deal just being introduced to begin with to Open Refine, which uh, is a tool to help clean messy data as it describes itself. And that we discovered with this data set that we've been building on Rosa Mulholland, that there was plenty of messy data, as it were, and as a way of we were precisely wanting to visualize, to track this sort of the geographical spread, for example, of her publishing network. But in order to do that and work with a sort of a Python code, for example, and Christoph wrote one for us, the data needed to be legible, and we, that open refine process, working with that, or learning to work with it, and discovering more about what you can and can't do, made us realize that there were questions we needed to ask, or hadn't asked, or hadn't recorded properly, so that it was a very good learning experience, in that way of our gathering of material and bibliographical detail, and learning experience that we could pass on and share with other researchers as well. So that was one aspect. Geraldine, did you want to add?
Yeah, I just to add to what you're saying there, Catherine. Like one of the things now, just to give a concrete example, we were the task to identify research questions which would be translated into a query for a visualizing program, for the Python program. So, we think about these questions and thinking about this foregrounded, as Catherine was saying, the gaps, missing information, issues in the way in which we had presented some of the metadata, or in other words, the way we had designed our data set for knowledge capture. So, we had to think about what we wanted to find out and how we might represent this visually. So all of these, it was wonderful to help us to think about what we'd done, and I suppose what we could do.
Yeah, that's a really interesting process, because on the one hand you think, oh, why didn't we think of it? But of course it's you realize, and Christoph pointed this out to us, that that's the way you develop these your metadata, is through, yeah, the gaps that you realize you have, or the questions you haven't asked. It's part of the process, and um, it is frustrating, but at the same time you learn a lot from the questions you should have asked. Well, I think first of all is just be bold and brave, and go ahead and explore. I think we were quite tentative, but once you plunge in and you have the time to work with these tools, they it's a learning process that's very rewarding, and quick. So I think my advice would be is explore. And it's not, obviously some areas of research are more relevant for this kind of work, and others not so, but the tools that we were introduced to, and other possibilities, for sharing one's data and knowledge in the end, such as Wikispace Cloud, and others, I think are very exciting, ideas, and open link data, generally, of course. So, um, pitfalls, I think, there, you, whatever you go with, you're going to realize there are things you wished you'd known before, and questions you'd wished you'd asked, but those aren't pitfalls. That's just, be aware, that seems to be how it works. Geraldine, did you want to add?
Yeah, I think that just what you're saying, Catherine, there, that it was, we had prepared so well as we thought for going, but it was only, when you're working digitally, that these things become the little things. But, I think that that's what it is. They are little things and they can be overcome. And, it was the support that was there, the advice, it really was of such benefit to us. So I think prepare as much as you can, and then be prepared to take the all the advice that's available. Well, I suppose the first thing is the blog that we've written, and we've written piece about our time at Trier, and this is going to be published on the Irish Women's Writing Network. And one of the graphs that we did at Trier is going to be on that. And then we've other things, projects. We're looking at a conference paper in the summer, and we're hoping to showcase some of the results from Trier and that, and some of the visualizations that we did. We're in that paper, we're asking, about digitization, and therefore access to digital material and data capture. And, how does this help to gain insights into the publishing context and the practices of 19th century Irish women writers? Another thing we're working on is an essay for a special issue, and again we're going to draw on visualizations for that. And in this essay, we're going to trace the arc and outward reach of Rose Mulholland, the prolific writer, and still, in many aspects under research of her writing life. So to trace her work, and again, that's going to be part of that essay. And of course, we're going to continue to work and to practice, all of the skills that we have learned while we're in Trier.
We'll be at ISIL in Galway. That's the ISIL conference, which is on digital technologies, isn't it? That's the conference we'll be delivering our paper with drawing on work done in Trier. Just an aside, because I think it's very interesting, that process, the question you asked about the tracing, how you build up this digital archive of material, and that Geraldine was describing this slow and painstaking process. And what I think is very interesting is an earlier project I worked on. I co-authored a book on a writer called Hannah Lynch, and we started working on that book before this sort of massive digitization of newspapers, periodicals, magazines, etc., etc. And it's very interesting to see, when we started out, it was literally the books in the library, and only, the copyright libraries and in the Bodleian or the British Library, you could get hold of those. And we're starting to work on a late 19th century Irish woman writer whose work was virtually inaccessible, to now, when you can do these searches, and what with Happy Trust and Internet Archive and British newspaper archives, that there's suddenly this extraordinary proliferation and availability of material publications by these writers, and yet it's still that trawling, slow process, but it's there. You're that process of discovery, and is ongoing, as we say, that there's I don't think these recovery processes are finite. The Rose Mulholland we're still working on, still finding, still developing knowledge. So it's very interesting how technology changes research possibilities. And I think, as Geraldine said, our experience at Trier has certainly demonstrated the suitability of this type of digital humanities approach to the huge scattered corpus of work by writers like Rose Mulholland and many of her contemporaries, who we've been working on, and I know other scholars are working on as well. So